Thank you. So, as Ada mentioned, my name is Tim. I am a freelance developer and serial founder of failing companies. I've been working with Django for I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years, and I love it. It's my favorite framework. So we're going to talk a little bit about it. So just a show of hands, has anybody used here Django professionally? Like actually got paid to make a site in Django? So what's that? 3? Okay, great. So has anyone else played with Django? Have you installed it and just like messed around? I hear you're getting quite good then.
I wouldn't go that far.
Okay. So, which one do I hit? Right? None of them? Oops. Okay. So what is Django? It's what we call a full stack Python web framework, which means that it goes right from the user interface, so right from interactions with the user, right back to the data store where your data gets plugged into your database. It doesn't do, in contrast to Rails, anything like JavaScript-wise. There's no JavaScript framework or anything JavaScripty that comes with Django. It comes with a lot of what we call batteries. So user authentication is included, and it comes with a built-in admin. Again, I'm going to contrast this to Rails because that's the framework that a lot of people know. Rails doesn't have a built-in admin, but it does have third-party apps that do that sort of stuff. And it's open source, BSD license, specifically redistribution and use in source and binary forms with or without modification are permitted, providing that certain conditions are met. So things like bundling the license and all that kind of stuff. Generally speaking, you can do whatever you like. Currently on version 1.6, as was announced in the news. I don't actually know what the new features are, apart from what was mentioned earlier, because I haven't had a chance to install it yet. And Django originally came from news organizations. World Online, which is the web department at the World Company in Lawrence, Kansas, developed it. And the reason is that they wanted to be able to, this is quite common in news organizations, is very quickly build new content types and microsites for breaking news. So I had an example in, I don't know whether they actually did this, but this is my example anyway. In the UK in 2009, there was a big scandal around MPs' expenses. And so what newspapers did is create like a really quick site where you could go on and read about your MP and see how much money they were making or taking in expenses. And so that's just a good example of how quickly you could. I mean, that's the kind of thing. I think they aim to kind of get a full site up in a week or something like that. So. The original team, the developers there, Adrian Holovati and Simon Willison, Jacob Kaplan-Moss and Wilson Minor. I think all of them, possibly with the exception of Wilson Minor, are still very heavily involved with Django. And there's 38 core developers. Adrian Holovati is at SoundSlice, I think that's his own company. Simon Willison is a freelance developer. Jacob Kaplan-Moss is at Heroku, and Wilson Minor, he does all the design at Ardio. So if you like Ardio. This guy is, his name's Django Reinhardt, and apparently the original developers of Django were very keen on this guy, so, and jazz in general, so that's why they named it after him. And there's quite a few projects in the Django community, a lot of the third-party applications that are built to run with Django. Like there's one which restyles your admin called Grappelli, and there's another one which does e-commerce called Satchmo. Satchmo is the nickname for some, I don't know my jazz at all. Is Satchmo the nickname for some famous translator? Right, there you go. Oh, there's another, I think there's a CMS called Ellington as well or something like that. Django is used on a few sites hopefully you've heard of. Some pretty big ones. Discuss has an insane amount of traffic, as Instagram's obviously hugely popular, Pinterest is massive. That one is Ardio, if you don't know, and then the Mozilla app site, The Onion. So, design philosophies of the framework. They wanted to not make Django depend on many things and also allow you to swap in and out components. So if you're really familiar with something like SQL Alchemy, you can use that in Django. If you don't like Django's template system for whatever reason, you can swap in any other like fluid templates or Elixir or fluid templates. I've never used any other kind of template language. The Django one works for me. So loose coupling is a system in which each of its components has or makes use of little or no knowledge of the definitions of other separate components. Obviously, with a framework, you're looking to have less boilerplate, you're looking to develop quickly, and you're looking to not repeat yourself. That's all pretty standard stuff, really. Again, I said very few dependencies. The actual only dependencies, as you might expect with a Python web framework, is that you need Python. No other dependencies, according to their website, which is awesome. That's all. And Django, being written in Python, tries to follow the Zen of Python, which is Python Enhancement Proposal 20. And so you can run this line to see, to import this, and this will give you a big list of the Zen of Python, and Django tries to keep in line with all of those. It has an ORM, an object relational mapping. So what that means, for those of you that don't know, is an abstraction layer on top of your database, which allows you to query the database without actually having to write SQL. And it handles stuff for you like SQL injection and all this kind of thing. So it provides a security layer as well. And we're supporting Postgres, MySQL, SQLite, and Oracle. The admin interface, which I'll keep talking about because I like it. It uses, if you don't know regexes, then they're pretty cool, and they're used a lot in Django for the URL stuff, so we'll go over that in a minute. It has a template system, again, swap-outable, as I said. I should try and make this bigger so I can actually look at you, but I can't. Caching, which is awesome. Internationalization, testing, and then the batteries. I won't go over all of these, but there's a lot of stuff in Django. Like I said, full stack framework, it kind of tries to do, wasn't trying to do everything for you, but it tries to throw in a lot of things so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's a framework, so that's the idea of quick development. If you need to write your own permission system, that's going to slow down your development. Stuff it doesn't have yet. The admin interface is a little dated. It works. It does the job. I mean, but you know, we've all become accustomed to pretty things, I think, on the web. And migrations. If you don't know what migrations are, they enable you to create schema changes in your database. So if you need to add a new field to a table or delete a table or something like that, and you have, say, for example, a couple of other developers, you need to be able to write what you changed in your schema so that when your other developers pull your code and your changes, they can very easily keep their database up to date. There's a third-party package called South, which has traditionally been the standard way of doing those. Or you can write your own SQL, but you've probably forgotten how to do that because you'll be using the Django ORM all the time. But migrations are coming in 1.7. I'm not quite sure what the release schedule of that is. It's probably like 5 or 6 months or something. So, how Django deals with request and response. Your browser makes a request for a web page that will hit your Django app via Nginx, whatever your web server is, and you'll have a file called your URL configuration, which via a regex works out which view function it should map your request to. Your view function, the next box, will process, it'll accept the request in a request object, it'll process that data, it'll maybe query for some more data from your database, and it'll then go back up through the system to your view. Your view will return a template rendering, so effectively just text. It could be HTML, XML, JSON, whatever you want, and then that JSON gets sent back to the browser. So most people are familiar with the model view controller design paradigm, which is called MVC. The model being the database layer, the view being the template, which would be what you would see, and the controller being the bit which actually does the processing. Django effectively is the same, but it has different terminology. So it uses actually model view templates, and models use data, as I expressed, as I said. In fact, I've gone over that. But there's one difference between the way that Rails works in Django. It's really only in terminology. A Rails model and a Django model are exactly the same. A Rails controller is a Django view. And if you think view function, that hopefully clarifies that. And a Rails view is a Django template. Yeah. This is a very basic URL file. You can see, so this actually, it's wrapping. I didn't want it to wrap, so pretend that doesn't wrap. But there's two URLs in here. One of them is just /users, which is here, which when your URL is your domain / users, and it ends in users, this $sign indicates that there should be nothing else after that. It will map, it will then execute the user list function, and this name on the end is so that you can quickly and easily get the URL. Say in your template, if you wanted to render a URL that was for the user list page, you would just use, I'll show you in a minute, a URL tag with this. And then there is another example here of users, but you're getting a specific user. So this, in parentheses here, is a named group, a regular expression. This whole thing is a regular expression. This is a named group, part of a regular expression. It's saying get any number for any size. And then that will pass, this should be user, this isn't wrong. This should be user, this is wrong. This should be user detail, not user update. And then this will, what it will actually do is it will pass this named group into the user update, the user detail function. So you'll get, I'll just demonstrate it, and I'll go to the next slide because that will demonstrate that. So here's the user detail. Every view function gets passed in the request, and in this instance, the ID, which comes from here, whatever you call it here, is what actually gets passed into the function. You can query the request to find various things, like you could find out whether it's a GET request, whether it's a POST request, in this instance, whether it's an AJAX request. So we're saying here, if this request is not AJAX, then return a response. Then the next line, this one here, we're going to the database, which I'll show you on the next slide, a couple more examples of that. We're essentially saying, get the user for this ID. Then what we do is we create a template context, which is going to be what is passed to our template, and then that is used for rendering. Here it's just a standard Python dictionary, and we're saying a key of user and the user object, which is our user from the database. And then we are rendering a template. So a little bit of boilerplate here, but this render to response function takes in the template that you want to render, the template context, which we define here, and what's called a context instant. Again, like I said, a little bit of boilerplate. The request context in this instance does things like adds to the template context, not actually this one, it's kind of mixed in for your template. It'll add basically other stuff. Say, for example, you wanted to have a site where on every page you had a login form. You could add, it might add a login form to every page, and then you could easily render that out. But it's not so important just for this example. And then the ORM, this is how you would define a database table within Django as user. So we have a variety of different fields. You have like an email field there, and then you specify through the attributes to that function, whether, in this case, email field, whether it should be unique. So obviously for a user, you would want the email to be unique all the time. And then you have a character field, whereby a max length 100, you can have that blank, and then a datetime field, which with no parameters here actually would, when you create a new user record, it will automatically populate that with the current date and time. And there's a couple of examples here of how you would use that user class, user model. If you want to get all users, it's just user.objects.all. Some users, well, they're pretty straightforward. There's a variety of different ways that you can do it. So you could do name equals Tim. In this case, I'm doing name starts with Tim. And then you can also, as I showed you on the previous slide, you can get a single object just by using the get method. That one will actually, this is like a design thing in Django. It will throw an exception if there is not a user that by that email. You have to catch that exception. It also provides some aggregation features as well. So if you need, I mean, you can do things like count, but if you need to count users that have, I don't know, all sorts of things, and summing and other stuff. So yeah, Django templates. There's a very strong separation of presentational logic from back-end code. Supposedly designers can't break stuff, and it certainly helps to prevent people from breaking stuff, but realistically they can. Developers don't have to worry about presentation. Yeah, really, I think if you're a developer and you're working on a website, you should have some idea about how that website's going to look. You can't just be completely isolated from it. Template inheritance, I'll show you an example of. That's pretty cool. And we can skip over that one. Yes, and it allows a high level of security, so you can't like delete an object from your database via the templates, which is useful. So this would be a base template. A base template would include like your kind of standard HTML boilerplate. So you've got your HTML5 doc type there, your header tags and stuff. But the important stuff's here. What you do is actually define these blocks. So I have a header block here, which just defines header tag, and then another div, which ID of container, which contains another block. These are the special Django tags. I'm sure it's pretty obvious, and this is an HTML tag, HTML, Django tag. And what happens is, in our templates further down the line, we will override, and basically, we'll override this template tag and actually populate that with content. So, if I just go to the next slide, you can see this one, this template, use it detail, will extend base HTML. This one was called base HTML. And all we're doing here, is wrapping a little bit there, is just, did I call it the same thing? Yeah, okay, block main down there. I'm redefining block main, but this time block main has some content in it. So what we did in our view function is we added user to the context. I'll just jump back to that. Here, our template context, which we passed when we were rendering our template, we passed a key of user and an object of user, a model object. And then here, we're actually using attributes of that model, printing them on the page. Yeah, and you can also do things like if tags here as well. This is what the standard Django admin interface looks like. It doesn't have that red bar at the top. I added that in to make sure I don't break anything on our production site, or at least help me not break stuff. And then this is actually like a third-party app, or well, I'll explain what an app is in a second, but a third-party skin for the admin. As you can see, it looks much nicer. This is actually, it's called Django Suit. It's actually a commercial product. So if you want to use it on a commercial site, it costs you $40. If it's open source, then it's free. Django also comes with a command line utility to do various things in your project. You can create new projects. You can synchronize your database, which is cool. What that does is it goes through all of your model files, which you defined, and it creates the database tables for them. One thing it doesn't do is if you add a new field, it won't know that you've added a new field. It'll just look at the database, it'll say, oh, this table exists, I don't need to do anything, even though it's kind of confusing. It says sync DB, it doesn't really sync with DB, well, not all the time. So that's what you would use your migrations for if you needed to add new fields. It has a built-in development server. It's that third command, run server. Has a test runner, which I believe in Django 1.6 is much more fully featured. That should be your most used command, of course. Python manage PyShell. That opens a Python shell into the Django environment, which allows you to like import your models easily and do all sorts of messing around, bug fixes, and seeing if stuff works. And then you have a command called DB shell. There's a ton of other ones, but I just put on the ones which you probably use most of the time. DB shell actually opens a database prompt directly onto your database, regardless of which database you're using. Right. So one of the things that the guys absolutely correctly pointed out when we did this talk last Tuesday is that there's some confusion between what is actually a Django, what I call a Django app, and then a Django app. So Django project, I suppose, is a much better term. Django project is your whole web application powered by the Django framework. But then what it also has is within that Django project you have what they call Django apps, which are essentially Python packages, but they follow a certain structure which enables them to be defined as Django apps. Django apps are small libraries designed to represent a single aspect of a project. A Django project is made of many Django apps. Some of those apps are internal to the project and will never be reused. Others are third-party Django packages. And then you also have a Django package, which would be things like okay, tagging isn't bundled with Django, so you might install a third-party package for that. The example I gave before of reskinning your admin, that might be a third-party package. I think the next slide is, okay, so this is what an app structure looks like. So the small component which you build your app from. Most stuff in there is pretty straightforward, I think. Your templates can either exist within an app. Say, for example, if you were going to distribute your app and you wanted other people to use it, you would put more like example templates in, just so that when somebody installed your app, they would actually work. But you can also have your templates globally within your Django project. And typically, if I'm doing a big project, I want all my templates to be in one place. So I'll have a templates folder in the root of my app, which I think I have here, like this one. And then you put all of your templates within that folder, but again, sort of compartmentalized into this app, like you have users and emails will be within templates. Yeah, so you have your apps typically. I mean, there's no actual, there's best practices as to how you should set this up, and I would say that if you set it up something similar to this, then any other Django developer will be able to come in and fairly quickly understand what's going on. If you kind of get crazy and start, you can put stuff all over the place, but you probably shouldn't. So you have apps folder with all your apps in it, you have your assets with images, JavaScript style sheets, then you have a settings file. If this was a real app, that would be probably a folder with a variety of different settings files in for your test or development or production. Templates, as I mentioned, your tests folder, and then your global URLs file. The way URLs files actually work is this URLs file can import URLs files which would exist within users. So say, for example, I had, every time I'm updating my user or I'm viewing a user, this would sort of say, your request would come in, it would hit this one, it would say, okay, this one actually imports one up here and go to the users. I did it like that. All right, we're almost done. There's a few examples of good sites. Neckbeard Republic, you've probably heard of. There's quite a few Python and also Django screencasts on there. It's pretty good. If you're interested in getting into Django, I'd highly recommend this one. This Daniel Greenfield, I'm not sure about Audrey Roy, but Daniel Greenfield is one of the core developers of Django, and this is a really down-to-earth guy knowing how to do stuff. It doesn't get too crazy. Yeah, any questions? I think we're good.
Now I know the philosophy of really separating the logic from the templates and trying to keep that separate. But when I was looking at this, I thought, I could just do a little bit more logic in the templates. It would make my life easier.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if you have that kind of issue or not.
Generally, my experience is that when you get a template with a lot of logic in it, it's technical debt, as Aaron can probably attest to. Like if you open up a template file and it's hugely indented and it's just massive, then that's a problem. So what you should be trying to do is in your view functions, you should be doing all of that logic there, and then just trying to pass as little really as you can get away with to your templates and just rendering that. Then when you look at your template, it's super obvious everything that's going on. There's not a ton of crazy if statements and all that kind of thing.
Well, just a little bit, if I could just do a little bit more in the template, then I'd have to save myself a lot of effort on the other side.
Sure. It's a design decision that the Django core devs made, and I think they've had to stand by that pretty firmly, because I think there's a lot of people who have the same opinion as you.
I was just going to comment that my understanding of it was that they wanted to do it to avoid, if they have someone who's a pure designer who's working on the front end, by limiting any of the design or the logic in the template system, you don't have to worry about the designer mucking something up. All they have to worry about is, okay, I'll just deal with the design stuff, and then the back-end guy can deal with all the logic stuff. And
Sure.
I'm sure being coming from a newspaper organization, that was probably one of their decisions.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Just going to add in that if you need that complexity at some point later on in the template, and we use template tags extensively, it's super simple to write your own templates tag to kind of escape from template back in Python, do some more processing, and then step back into another partial where you can
Yeah.
set that as fit your content back there.
Yeah, it's a good point. So your designer would go to the developer and say, hey, I need to do this. Can you write me a template tag or something like that, and then they would. Sure.
The websites like Pinterest, do they really find the Django enough for them, or they have to customize things?
Enough, as in, how do you mean, like for the huge scale that they're running at? I would like, I don't know, I've never run a website at a huge scale. I would imagine that perhaps they write some stuff in, like I understand Twitter kind of moved from Rails to write stuff in Java and things like that. So maybe, but like I don't have any first-hand knowledge of that. So I think that I've read stuff for Discuss. I think they're pretty much still running on Django, but they use a huge amount of caching and like front end, like something called Varnish. I think they use that for like front end caching and stuff. So, but yeah, like I don't have a huge amount of experience in that. I wish I did, because that would mean I'm doing all right. Sure.
Can I just ask more of a practical question? So I remember looking at Django when it first sort of started. I was using Drupal and I was sick of it. And, but there wasn't many places that would host it. So how's the hosting now? I mean, I was doing a lot of small sites where
Yeah.
you had to find a host as well for the client.
So I think there's quite a few hosting options. Like there's a few of these platform as a service options. Like so if you're not really too familiar with your like deployment and Linux skills and things like that, you can now host on Heroku, and they say it's like a one-line deploy. There's a little bit of configuration, but it's nowhere near as much as actually installing Nginx and doing everything on a bare Linux server. So there's that. There's .cloud as well, which is pretty good, and then
Gondor.
Gondor, right?
Gondor.io.
Yeah. So there's a couple of platforms as a service which are like, sorry?
Python Anywhere.
The
Python Anywhere.
Python Anywhere. I've not heard of that one, but there's a few that like specifically for Django as well. So yeah, I would say that hosting certainly has got a lot easier recently, the last few years. Yes.
You find in your experience that Django caters to a specific type of website, like a news kind of organization, or is it more
You know, I kind of think that, yeah, there's always going to be the right tool for the job, but I think that, for me, the technology, like, if it's something like if you're comparing Django and Rails, I think that you should just use whatever you're most comfortable with, and you're gonna be able to develop faster. And like, there's huge sites running on Django, and there's huge sites running on Rails. So like, starting a holy war about which one's the best, like, I think you need to consider more about I think people should consider more about the business than the actual technology. But like, then if it's something like, I don't know, like Node, or you need some kind of crazy evented system or something like that, then that's a different choice. But did I answer your question? I think I might have forgotten what your question was.
do you find that it's like there's a lot of tools specifically for like news?
Right.
Or is it more general?
It's always been really good for content sites. So obviously there's a number of news organizations using it. So yeah, it's I guess it's more geared towards that. But like, there's no, I don't think only one of those sites that I showed you, like the sort of well-known that are using Django as a news site. So it's perfectly applicable to a variety of situations, I think. Yeah.
So along the same lines, what's it not good for?
What's it not good for? Anyone else care to help me with that? Like maybe like real-time stuff. So if like you have like a real-time chat application or something where you might use, I don't know, I've never written any of those, but I think Nathan probably has. He's probably a good person to answer.
I can kind of answer that because I know I've watched a few talks by the guys from Discuss, and they, like you were saying, Discuss uses Django for all of their like entire interface and everything. But there is one part where they don't use Django, and that's when you're looking at comments. I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but Discuss is like a commenting system. When you're looking at the comments, there's sometimes a notification that tells you that there's new comments available, and that's pushing
Yeah.
requests out to all these browsers saying, hey, there's new comments, and that part's not written in Django. They've transitioned away for that really important piece because it's
Yeah.
not something that was really
Yeah, that makes sense.
They were using like
questions? Sure.
So if you wanted to see, there's, I believe the Instagram, the kind of semi-defunct Instagram engineering blog has some posts about how they scaled out their Django to
Yeah.
billions of views as well.
Yeah, there's some really good stuff on there.
Yeah.
They do like, I think there's some tech talks as well, that kind
Yeah.
of things that they've done.
Yeah, so that's nice. It's a completely different world when you're dealing with that scaling issue, but it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.